You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
The source of truth for the medtech industry
coexists with the prophets.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech with your host, Omar and Khateeb. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Episode 200, we made it. And I felt that for this particular episode, it was important to cover a very important topic, which is the 2024 election. So in today's episode, we're going to dive into a topic that for many is going to be quite polarizing, and the potential impact of a Trump versus Harris administration on the medtech industry. I was hesitant to do this, but I realized that it was important to do this because, well, this is the number one podcast in medtech, and we pride ourselves on being the source of truth. And for the most part, we try our best to approach things in a most unbiased and objective way. And in a world that really thrives on a binary choice between black and white and right and wrong, etc., especially with social media, I believe that there is a lot of value in the gray area. And this is where a lot of understanding can grow. So politics, if I can remind you, is complex, and our emotions often run deep with what we discuss. But what I would like to do is invite you to approach this conversation with an open mind, a calm heart, and just listen. As one of my favorite Stoic philosophers, Epictetus, would say, we have 2 ears and one mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. So that being said, I'll be doing the speaking because it's a solo pod today. But I want you to try to listen. And obviously, I do want to share that I'm going to do my best to provide a balanced view, presenting policies, actions, and impacts of each potential administration on the MedTech Center. But I also pulled a lot of research from some of the big names in tech, people like Mark Andreesen and Ben Horowitz in terms of their position. They represent a large majority of tech and startup world. Also pulling from the All In podcast, who's also plugged into the tech and startup world, plus my own research and polls. I'm going to share all of that in a moment. So some qualitative and quantitative data for you guys to go through. And again, to remind you, I have my own biases in this. I'm not immune to that. And that's been shaped by my own experiences and beliefs. Me personally, I'm a startup guy. And so there's, for me, a clear decision on this. But I try to counterbalance these things by drawing on, again, wide range of industry polls, then a little research, thoughtful analysis. Again, I don't run a think tank here, so bear with me on this. And the one thing I'd say is that, yes, at the end of this episode, like, you'll probably have a bias towards one side or the other. I don't want to see this as choosing sides. I want you to understand the consequences of each path. So sit back, relax, and let's sort of dive into it. Now, we're going to go through a few things. Number one is that I want to show you the results. The first part is I'm going to show you the results of a poll I did on LinkedIn. Again, a very unscientific poll, but a poll nonetheless. Then I want to share with you how I was able to find the policies for each candidate. We'll dive into the pros and cons of both, and I'm going to share how I was able to pull those conclusions. From there, we're going to dive into what tech's position is on this, specifically pulling from notes from Mark Andreesen and Ben Horowitz, who run the VC firm Andreesen Horowitz. And then we'll kind of round things out with, in my opinion, the number one most important issue as it applies not just to medtech, but to tech. And it's one that's extremely important for me. We're going to spend the most time on that because I want you to understand the policy, the implication on the startup and tech world, and how it's going to impact you. So that being said, let's dive into it. First, I want to share with you a little bit on my poll. So for those who are watching on YouTube or Spotify, here we go. I'm going to share my screen here. In this poll, we had 690 votes. 690 votes. And of those 690 votes, we had 70% going towards Trump, 30% to Harris. Literally a pretty split evenly there, or at least 70% whole and 30%. So 70% of 690 is about 483 votes. And again, very unscientific poll. The one thing that I will point out is that in the comments section, there were definitely a lot of very emotionally charged comments, which is understandable because this is a very emotionally charged election, more than maybe just as much as 2020. Now, when it came to the policy, I had to do a lot of research and pull things, and I had to use different mechanisms to do that. But I want to share with you something that, again, this is a bias, but this is my bias, which is how easy is it for me to understand what the candidates stand for? So when I look up the Trump administration, again, I go to Google, I type in Trump policies. The very first thing that pops up at the very top of the page is Agenda 47 for Donald Trump. That goes straight to his site. When I go to his site, it lists out 20 things that they're going to be focused on. Okay. For those who are curious, the number one thing, which is seal the border and stop migrant invasion. I'm quoting directly from there. But then when you want to dive into the more of the Republican platform, you go to the 2024 GOP platform, which is Make America Great Again, and it's about 16 pages going into policies. I want to point something out because many of you have asked me about Project 2025. Project 2025 has nothing to do with this administration. Even Donald Trump was once interviewed on this, and he had no idea what Project 2025 was until he read it. And his comment was, Project 2025, I'm paraphrasing here, was written by a right-wing a-hole. Okay, so Project 2025 has nothing to do with their policy or platform. This is actually something that I didn't know. I thought that was part of it, and then I did some research and found that out. Now, if we contrast this with the Harris administration, and we all know that Google has been criticized for being biased when it comes to news and information. So when I type in the Harris policies, what I find are a lot of articles. And of course, if you compare it from Trump to Harris, when I go for Trump policies, the first hit is Donald Trump, but then top stories are pretty much all about Kamala Harris. If I go to Harris, again, top stories all positive about Harris. And finally, I find her website, which is KamalaHarris.com, Kamala for president. When I go there, first is ask me to donate. Okay, not donating. I do not donate to any party, by the way, just for the record. And I can't find, there's nowhere, and I'm looking at the entire site. You guys are looking at it here. There's lots of places to donate, but there's no policies. When I click on Meet Kamala Harris, it kind of writes about her story and her history and background, her contributions. No policies. Click on Take Action, same thing. And so for me, this is concerning because when it comes to a presidential candidate, I would like to know what their policies are. And again, with the exception of the interview that was done on Friday with CNN, the Harris campaign has refused to do any interviews with people. And again, this is something that's very important to American democracy, something that JFK really prided American politics on, is that our ability to go and just meet with the press, debate, etc. Again, with the Trump administration, they've appeared on multiple podcasts, they've done interviews, so on and so forth. Okay, and again, I want to be balanced, but again, I have to be factual, and this is a fact. Okay. So now let me dive into how I was able to pull. I have my notes here, and essentially the way that I was able to pull through the different policies was essentially taking what I found on the Trump administration's website, plus what I found on Harris, just researching and also looking at what did the Biden administration do, because we've had 4 years of data from that. So let's go on both of them and talk about the pros and cons of them for the medtech industry. So when you compare the potential impact of a Trump administration, should he return to office versus the Harris administration, assuming she takes office, there are a lot of key factors, both including strategics and startups. Okay, and the buckets that I put them in are innovation, regulation, economic policies, and then their overall impact to the startup ecosystem. For me, our industry moves forward because of startups. There's a reason why in our industry there's a very clear path to acquisition, because if you do a good job as a medical device company, you will be acquired, right? The larger companies cannot innovate that way, not because they don't have the money, but it's just because it's a risk profile. It just doesn't work. And so the strategics like Medtronic, Intuitive, J&J, Boston Scientific, they rely on the startup industry to innovate. Okay, so let's go to the Trump administration policy. So on the regulatory approach, there's a focus on deregulation. So during his first term, there's a significant focus on deregulation, and that include the efforts to streamline the FDA approval process for medical devices, which potentially reduce time to market, which is important for our industry because it costs a lot of money and time to take these products to market. Okay, and that makes it harder to raise money. The Trump administration emphasized reducing bureaucratic hurdles, which could benefit the medtech industry by speeding up innovation cycles. This also might be an indicator in the sense that RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, who is a third-party candidate, also endorsed Trump. And it looks like if Trump was elected into office, that Robert F. Kennedy has an opportunity to serve as an advisor on one of the advisory boards. He was approached to be the vice president for Trump. He decided not to take that job, mainly because of its limitations and restrictions, and it just didn't fit well with what he was interested in. But he has most recently come out as of Friday and full-heartedly endorsed the Trump administration. So let's look at tax cuts in the Jobs Act. The corporate tax rate under the Trump administration was reduced from 35% to 21%, which was both beneficial for large medtech companies and startups, and this allowed for greater reinvestment into R&D and growth. If you look in the public and private partnerships, Trump administration promoted public-private partnerships to drive innovation. It's particularly seen in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which could be favorable to a medical device innovation and deployment. Now let's look at the startup impact. When it comes to access to capital, policies that supported tax cuts and deregulation could make the investment environment a lot more favorable, increasing access to capital for startups. I can confirm this, having been to the LSI summits and speaking to various investors. One of the concerns for new money coming into our industry, meaning investors who have not normally invested in our industry, is to ask, how long will it take to get through regulation, and can the company make it through regulation with current investments, right? On regulatory flexibility, startups might benefit from a lot more lenient regulatory environment, which reduces the burden of compliance in the early stages. That's probably one of the most important parts of our industry. And the last thing that I do want to point on before we move to the Harris administration is that Trump administration during their time did implement or at least repeal the medical device tax. Which is, I think, about a 2.5% tax on sales of medical devices. Again, that's a good thing because it costs a lot of money to take a medical device to market. So that being said, let's jump to what makes the Harris administration a good choice for medtech. So on the regulatory approach, from what we can gather from what Harris has said, the Biden administration, et cetera. And again, I'm pulling from the Biden administration because the Harris and her administration have fully endorsed and said that they're on board with a large majority of the platform that the Biden administration had been running on. So there was a continuation of it. This is part of, I believe, one of the reasons why she was picked. And there wasn't really much of a primary because it was the continuation of that platform. So on the regulatory approach, stricter regulations, Kamala Harris, as mentioned, is aligned with the Democratic platform, which would likely support stronger regulatory oversight, which includes more stringent FDA processes, particularly in areas such as cybersecurity and data privacy. So this could slow down time to market, but can improve safety and efficacy, which is crucial for long-term trust in medical devices. We do know that this is a growing issue with a lot of medical devices essentially being digitized, coming online. And so cybersecurity is an important process about that. We do need perhaps better regulations and maybe more of them for that. One of the things they also have a big focus on is equity and access. So Harris is likely to prioritize policies that ensure broader access to medical devices, possibly through expanded government programs or mandates on pricing, which could impact profitability but increase market size. We've seen that with her approach to having price controls in the food markets, and I'll comment on that later on. When we look at investment and innovation, Harris might push for government funding innovation initiatives, specifically in areas such as AI, data analytics, and cybersecurity, which is great. I think that a lot of great government funding has gone into medtech. I mean, if we look at Intuitive Surgical, which is as of today the second largest market cap medtech company out there, second to Abbott. And Intuitive, the Da Vinci system, came out of DARPA, which is an arm of the military, right? And then moving on, startup impact. So on the startup side, stricter compliance requirements. So startups, this is the downside, might face higher upfront costs due to stricter compliance requirements, particularly because of the cybersecurity and data protection area. Her support on emerging technologies. There may be more direct government support or grants for startups working in cutting-edge areas such as AI-driven medical devices, which provides opportunities for growth in innovative sections. So who is better for medical device industry based on reading this? Okay. So, and again, I'm doing my best here to be as balanced as possible and walk you guys through this. But if we look at established companies like strategics, the Trump administration policies may be more beneficial due to deregulation and tax benefits, which will allow for faster innovation and reduce costs. For startups, there's a little bit of a split. If you look at the Trump administration, they offer a much more favorable regulatory environment and access to capital, but with risks associated with market entry due to lower regulatory barriers, okay? If you look at the Harris administration is going to be more beneficial because while strict regulations do increase the cost, there's an emphasis on innovation and government support for new technologies that might provide long-term benefits, especially in high-tech sectors such as AI and the Internet of MedTech or Internet of Things, you know? So overall recommendation is if the goal is rapid market entry and capitalizing on lower regulatory barriers, Trump administration might be more beneficial. However, if you're a startup, for example, and you're looking for long-term growth, support in high-tech innovation, maybe more robust market trust, the Harris administration could, offer a more sustainable environment. Okay, so that's one part of this episode. Now, let's look at two gentlemen who I respect quite a lot because of their contributions to the tech world. Also, they sit in a position where the smart tech guys and gals in Silicon Valley look to these two for a lot of guidance, and that's Mark Andreesen and Ben Horowitz, and their support. So they have fully supported and endorsed Trump for office for what they call little tech. I'm going to walk you through my notes from that. So, of course, they both have admitted that a lot of their friends are going to be upset for supporting Trump. But for both Mark Andreesen and Ben Horowitz, the future of technology and startups and America is at stake. And so they're focused on what they call the little tech agenda. If you would like, you can go to their website, Andreesen Horowitz. Let me tell you, I should have that up sooner. So if you go to A16Z, and I'll share my screen real quick so you guys can see it, A16Z.com, you can read this thing called the Little Tech Agenda. You can also go on YouTube or Spotify or Apple and look up, and they have their own podcast, and they did a whole interview, an hour and a half long, that I listened to and took notes on. So let's dive into it. So when it comes to startups and tech policies, both Andreesen and Horowitz have spent a lot of time in Washington talking to politicians from both parties. Now, here's the first issue that's come up is that they've tried to work with the Biden administration, including attempts to meet with President Biden himself, and they had a lot more success in their conversations with the Trump administration. Little tech, in their terms, for tech startups is as a contrast to, let's say, big tech incumbents like Amazon, et cetera. So as it relates to our industry, think of your average little startups compared to like Medtronic or Intuitive. Okay. So historically, little tech has operated independent of politics. Okay. However, as the saying goes, you may not be interested in the politics, but the politics are interested in you, which is a theme to this episode. They believe that bad government policies are the number one threat to ensuring American supremacy. America has had a technology supremacy for a long time. It's part of the reason why we are in the position we are today in the world. And government policies are the number one threat to that. And the critical role that little tech startups play in ensuring that supremacy is, in their opinion, a first-class political issue. So for Mark Andreesen, he's traditionally supported Democrats who are pro-business and pro-technology, like Bill Clinton, like Barack Obama. That being said, there has been a recent shift in the Democratic Party towards an anti-tech and anti-business sentiments. Okay, these are both tech guys, Democrats, live in California like myself. Trump, in contrast, in Mark Andreesen's opinion, has positioned himself as a supporter of business and technological innovation. Okay. Ben Horowitz feels that Trump's administration is much more favorable for innovation, particularly in emerging sectors like blockchain and AI. His platform supports the crypto industry by ending the unlawful and un-American crackdown on crypto startups, which defends the right to self-custody of digital assets and opposes a central banking digital currency. An example of this is that while you can have a crypto startup, the current government environment makes it so that it, pretty much makes it almost impossible to go and like work with the bank as a crypto startup, right? Or even run ads. Okay, and this is and at least the Trump administration's platform on AI and cryptocurrency is in stark contrast to the Biden administration, now Harris administration's approach, which has been a lot more regulatory and more restrictive. Okay, and again, you might be asking yourself, well, what does like AI and crypto have to do with medtech? Well, what's going to affect one industry will affect ours because it's all innovation, right? The Biden administration has taken a very aggressive regulatory stance against crypto. And then agencies like the SEC and the FDIC have used various means to stifle the industry. And they refuse to provide clear guidance, issuing numerous lawsuits and making it difficult for crypto companies to access basic banking services, as I mentioned before. This stifles innovations and creates an environment where startups struggle to survive. Again, keep in mind is that when you look at some things that are innovative, right? Think about medtech. Is it possible? Have I personally seen medtech companies who have tried to do some type of innovation through the blockchain? Absolutely, right? Trump's platform promises a complete endorsement of crypto and digital assets. He also came out at the Bitcoin conference and fully endorsed that, which is critical to the growth of new sectors, right? This aligns with Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreesen's belief that less regulation and more freedom are essential to technological advances. Innovation comes from startups. Let's just face it, not necessarily the large companies. Startups keep big companies on their toes, and Trump's policies create that fertile ground for these smaller companies to grow, ensuring the competition and maintaining, again, this is the key thing, U.S. leadership in technology, which gives us American supremacy, is vital for economic and military dominance. Okay. Now, yes, believe it or not, I'm a big believer that America should be at the forefront of military technology, not because I support wars. Me personally, I would like these forever wars to end, but it is very important as a global leader that your country is number one in that. Saying that you're for being number one in military technology is like saying, hey, I want us to be the number one leader in biotech because I want more, I want there to be more disease. That's not necessarily true or how it works. The thing that Andreesen Horowitz believes, and I definitely believe, is that we disagree with we disagree with the idea that monopolies drive innovation. Monopolies stifle innovation, and Trump supports a very competitive environment where startups can thrive. And this is crucial for maintaining that, again, technological dominance that we have. Technology is really the key to maintaining our global economic and military dominance. The policies that we see out of the Trump administration are more likely to support the necessary technological advances that will keep the U.S. ahead, especially in areas like AI. And again, I know that earlier in my notes, we talk about the Harris administration's potential funding of like things like AI and cybersecurity, but that comes with a lot of regulations, right? And regulations, in my opinion, and Andreesen Horowitz's opinion, will stifle innovation. Okay, AI, if we look at it right now, is really set to revolutionize both the economy, military strategy, and medtech. Okay, it is already identified as the Department of Defense as a cornerstone technology for the future. Okay, and we know how many great technologies have come out of the military that have found their way into the private sector in medtech. Trump seems a lot more aligned with pushing these advances forward, while, again, looking at the Biden administration, which I know this is not Joe Biden running, but the Harris administration has fully supported that platform in the last 4 years. They've had a very restrictive stance on AI regulation. And for example, like limiting computing power, so that could hinder growth. Both Andreesen and Horowitz found it very difficult to make progress with the Biden administration on tech policy. For me personally, I don't believe that's going to change much with the Harris administration, because she was, Harris was vice president during that time. They've been unwilling to engage with them, with Andreesen and Horowitz, meaningfully on crucial issues such as crypto and AI. And again, Trump's been a lot more open and taken a very clear pro-innovation stance, okay, which is essential to the future of technology in America. So there are two very stark differences between these two camps. And, when we look at American technology leadership, it stems from a very complex system that was built over the last 150 years through pioneering spirit, work ethic, rule of law, deep capital markets, and long-term government investment in scientific research. However, the foundation, or you want to call it the vanguard of American technology supremacy, has always been the startup. From Thomas Edison to Henry Ford to SpaceX to Tesla, startups are the ones that bring fresh ideas, competition, and willingness to challenge the status quo. If we look at one of the things that makes America very unique, we all know that birth rates are declining around the world. In America, we've kind of artificially solved for that because of our ability to attract a lot of immigrants, right? I'm not in favor of the migrant crisis that's going on right now. That being said, there is no offense. There's no Canadian dream. There's no Australian dream. There's no dream, but there is an American dream. And our ability to attract the best and brightest, hardworking people to America, to innovate, to create businesses. Like, if you haven't done it, go try and start a business in another country. Depending on where you are at, the rules and regulations make it so difficult. The European Union makes it difficult. Is why people love America. And so if we lose that, we're losing a very important part of what makes America a supreme dominant force in the world. Okay. And unfortunately, the current challenge to startups is that the American government is far more hostile to new startups than it used to be. And as an example, regulatory agencies have been empowered to use investigations, prosecutions, and threats to hobble new industries like blockchain and like AI. Again, what we see in one place, don't think that medtech is going to be safe and it's going to be a different scenario, right? It's a very anti-startup bias. It's across government. It's a clear threat to American technology success and therefore American economy, military, and people. And again, these are notes that I've taken from Andreesen and Horowitz. Me personally, I agree with this. If you don't, that's perfectly fine. Maybe you have a different opinion of that. That's totally okay. And so, to ensure a thriving future where we have a great environment for startups, for medtech, for little tech, you need to reverse these policies and support startups. Positive policies should encourage startups to flourish, which will benefit customers, will foster competition, ensure big incumbents remain dynamic, right? And part of that, at least in our industry, is some regulatory reform. So we have to expand things like high-skilled immigration, drive success of the U.S. tech companies globally against hostile forces. And, we have some really hostile forces out there in countries. I won't mention them, right? And now I want to end this episode with the single issue that, at least for me, as it pertains to medtech, is one of the most, dare I say, important ones. This is a very concerning issue. This alone has persuaded me one way or the other. And so that issue, as I pull it up here, is that Kamala Harris has backed some of Biden's tax plans. And those plans include a proposed 25% wealth tax on people with over $100 million in assets. And while it's important to note that passing these tax increases would require going through Congress, I want to discuss that proposal itself so you can understand the implications of this, okay? So in Biden's 2025 tax plan, and again, I'm going to share my screen so you know exactly where you can find it. You can Google general explanations of the administration's fiscal year 2025 revenue proposals. This is found on home.treasury.gov. And specifically, you want to go to page 82, where it starts to say proposal, okay? And I've taken some screenshots of that, and I'm going to walk you through it, okay? So what exactly is that, okay? So in his 2025 tax plan, the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget noted that Harris's campaign endorses the suite of revenue options included in President Joe Biden's recent budget. And this confirms, again, continuity between the Harris and Biden economic plans. So the proposed 2025 tax plan includes a 25% unrealized capital gains tax on those with over $100 million in assets, increasing the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%, okay, and quadrupling the stock buyback tax from 1% to 4%, okay? And so I want to talk about the one that seems to be the most controversial, at least in my eyes, which is the 25% unrealized capital gains tax, okay? And to just put into context, there's about 5,000 people that fall into this category where they have over $100 million in assets, okay? Now, the first thing you want to ask yourself, and again, I've fortunately, read through this, taking some notes. I've also had the fortunate to hear from the great entrepreneurs and hosts over at the All In Pod about this. So first of all, is this fair? And the thing that you want to ask yourself is that it's not necessarily about fairness, okay, but more about the fact that we're at a point where enough people don't feel the benefits of capitalism and they want to push back. And so I want to thank Chamath Palatapahia for sharing this, but I'm going to share this one image, if I may. Got to get my computer working here. So I'm going to share this image here. Okay. So this is a chart showing the top federal individual income tax rate from 1913 to today. So from 1913 to today, tax rates at the federal level have varied widely, and they often swing to the extremes when there was the political will to do so, okay? And we might be in that moment right now, okay? The problem, though, okay, is that unlike the 1940s and 50s where people were like technically geopolitically locked in, today people have a lot more options for where they want to live and start companies, okay? So 1940s and 50s, as you see, the top federal individual income tax rate was extremely high, over 70%. And even in 1943 is well over 90%. 1940, what are you going to do? You can't go anywhere, okay? Today, you can, and people do. If these extreme policies are enacted, people will react accordingly, and possibly by voting with their feet, moving their businesses and citizenships elsewhere, okay? And that means also going to other countries to create their own company. So if we look at the United States, for example, in the United States, people have been leaving California for states like Texas, which has lower taxes, places like Florida, okay? And if you have extreme taxation at the national level, it could likely cause people to move from the U.S. to countries like, Dubai, UAE, or Malta or Portugal. Malta, I know about Malta, but UAE and Portugal offer things such as golden visas, okay? Now, you may ask, well, that's not going to happen in MedTech. It has, actually. I'm going to name 3 companies who have moved some parts of their company, or at least their HQ, overseas. Medtronic moved their company HQ to Ireland back in 2015. So right after they acquired Covidien for, I think, $54 billion, they moved their tax domicile. So in terms of lost revenue, tax revenue, and again, I had to put this part through ChatGPT to do the research for me. Supposedly, we lost about $400 to $500 million in 2023 tax revenue because of that. Okay, Zimmer Biomet has some of its office in Switzerland. That supposedly happened in 2015. You know, and so there are multiple examples like that. Another one, Boston Scientific, while it's it remains a U.S. based entity, right? Also does this. So my point is that strategics are not afraid to do this. I think the biggest ones, and I tried to do my best on Boston Scientific and Zimmer. I'm still confirming that, but if we look at something like Medtronic, this is front page news that they moved their HQ to Ireland for tax reasons. Okay, so big companies will do that. You better believe rich people will do that. Okay, and here's the other thing: the wealth tax is 25% on unrealized capital gains if your net worth is above $100 million. Okay, so if we go back to the proposal, I want to walk through the details of that, just so that you understand. So the first thing you have to know is that it's on assets that are greater than 100 million. Okay, so we understand that. Okay, the first time you can pay this, okay, you can pay this over 9 years, and afterwards you can pay it over a spread of 5 years. Those payments are treated as prepayments on taxes due when the gains are realized. Okay, now every year you report to the IRS your assets value. If there's no revaluation event like a new financing round, then guess who gets to decide what your company's worth? The government. They set a nominal rate increase on this. You can definitely appeal that, but it's definitely a process. Okay. Payments of the minimum tax would be treated as a prepayment available to be credited against subsequent taxes on realized gains to avoid taxing the same amount of gain more than once. Okay. Taxpayers with greater than the threshold would be required to report to the IRS on an annual basis separately by the asset class, the total basis and total estimated value of their assets in each specified asset class, total amount of time. Okay. So what are those asset class? Okay. Tradable assets, for example, publicly traded stock would be valued using end of year market prices. I'm going to come back to that as an example, very specific, because I know some of you like to day trade and buy individual stocks. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. So taxpayers would not have to obtain annual market valuations of non-tradable assets. Okay. Instead, non-tradable assets would be valued using the greater of the original or adjusted cost basis, the last valuation event from the investment, borrowing, or financial statements, or other methods approved by the secretary. Valuations of non-tradable assets, for example, startups or real estate, would not be required annually and would instead increase by a conservative floating annual return, the 5-year treasury rate plus 2 percentage points in between valuations. IRS may offer avenues for taxpayers to appeal valuations, such as through appraisal. Again, that's not easy. You need like a team of lawyers and accountants to do that. Okay. And then the last page, and now I'm going to jump into sort of unpacking those. Taxpayers, and this is page 83. Taxpayers will be treated as illiquid if illiquid meaning you don't have the money. Illiquid if tradable assets held directly or indirectly by the taxpayer make up less than 20% of the taxpayer's wealth. Taxpayers who are treated as illiquid may elect to include only unrealized gain in tradable assets in calculation of their minimum tax liability. However, taxpayers making this election would be subject to deferral charge upon and to the extent of the realization of gains of non-tradable assets. The deferral charge would not exceed 10% of unrealized gains. Okay, so let's stop there. So what does this all mean? Well, It's not good, because for startups, and again, this is where I'm going to admit my bias because I'm a startup guy. For startups, this is huge. So if you're a founder and your company ends up being valued at $10 billion, right? And you own, 25% of it, but you don't have a secondary market to sell to, or, maybe you don't even have the liquidity to pay the huge tax bill on those, again, unrealized gains. Unrealized gains, by definition, means that you have not sold anything. Like you can, for example, I have a house in Florida. I'm trying to sell it right now. The value of my house has gone up over the years. I did not pay taxes on those on that because it's an unrealized gain. If I had to pay taxes on that, that'd be a huge problem, right? So again, think about this when it comes to tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. How much does it hurt founders? So you might ask yourself, well, if they have to pay the tax, they have to pay the tax. So where do they get money? Well, they go and sell more of their company. So you lose more of your company. It's the wrong incentive. And so if you're illiquid, you can defer the taxes, but you'll end up paying more when the gains are realized. Okay, that's the problem. And the government has tried to cover this policy has tried to cover scenarios where assets are tied up in real estate or in private stocks, but the implications are still harsh. And there's a notion that these things aren't going to get thrown out because there was a case, and this was actually introduced by the Trump administration. I believe it's the Repatriation Act, where essentially if somebody has some gains and they renounce their citizenship and leave, the government can still go after them and seize their assets, right? And they thought that the 16th Amendment might protect against this, as indicated by a Supreme Court ruling, but the Supreme Court took a look at this and decided not necessarily to throw it out and say that, the government essentially had a right to go after them even if they give up their citizenship, right? So that was challenged, but again, wasn't thrown out. Okay, so the way you need to look at this is that it's a seizure of assets that's directed at people with $100 million and 100 millionaires and billionaires, okay, where they want to get 25% of what they have, okay? I'm going to get to a moment why this should be concerning to you. Unrealized gains tax is problematic mainly because the tax assets that haven't been sold, meaning there's no sale price to determine the tax liability and no liquidity to pay the taxes, okay? That's the problem. You don't know what it's worth. Realization, meaning like when you sold an asset, is important because it actually gives you a sale price. You know exactly how much you made, and you have the liquidity to pay the tax bill. So when I purchased X amount of shares from Amazon many years ago, if I decide to sell my shares today, I will have realized my gains, and I will know exactly how much that is because it's a public company. I've sold it for a certain amount, and I have the money now to pay for that because it's all been realized. With unrealized gains, the problem is that you don't know what the asset is worth when it's a private asset. Valuation is constantly jumping up and down, and leaving it up to the government and the Treasury Department to decide what your company is worth, I believe, is not a good idea. This new policy is going to require a completely new tax bureaucracy in every company. It's going to require a lot more legal and accounting work for everyone involved. You're going to hire legions and teams of lawyers and accountants for this. Not everybody can afford to do that. And founders, what's the worst is that medtech founders will be forced to sell parts of their companies to pay the tax bill, which could drain the market of capital and stifle innovation. It could even, to be honest with you, discourage people from starting new companies. Okay? When all this happens, assets are going to start getting dumped on the market because people have to raise around just to pay their tax bill, and you starve the market of capital. If you look at some of the greats in our industry, Manny Villafana, Fred Mall, I can name others, but these people made a lot of money in their first or second companies, and they didn't have to work again. They decided to come back and create other companies, invest more, etc. Okay. This kind of policy is going to ruin the entrepreneurial market and cause people to essentially just retire early because they just don't want to deal with it. Imagine for a moment, imagine you're a billionaire and you're young, or you just have a lot of energy, and you're like, I want to invest more. I want to create some new companies. If you knew that you're going to start getting taxed and you can lose a lot of your wealth on unrealized gains, would you do it? Probably not. The incentive is not to do it. This tax policy could cause significant economic shifts, especially with wealthy individuals and businesses moving assets out of the country to avoid these taxes. Again, I want to remind you, many of you might be thinking, well, Omar, I'm not a 100 millionaire. I'm not a billionaire, right? 100 millionaire, by the way, is called a centimillionaire. I just learned that today. Why would this affect me? Has government ever known of a sane stopping point? Absolutely not. And so when it comes to wealthy individuals, do you think that wealthy individuals got their money and kept their money because they make dumb decisions? No. The moment this happens, those people are going to move away from the US. They're going to move their assets away from the US. And then the government's going to have to tax somebody. They're going to start moving downstream. This is how a lot of this happens, right? And more importantly, I want to think about innovation. There's a really exciting company, spine company called Lem Surgical. Well, from what I can read, a lot of the money that they raised came from wealthy individuals. If you look at Tesla, a lot of the money they raised early on started with wealthy individuals, because a lot of venture capital firms, they're actually not that innovative, and not that, they're somewhat risk averse, right? If you want to look at the big moonshots, it doesn't start with venture capital firms. It starts with wealthy private individuals. And if it's like this, it's just, there's an incentive not to do it. Now, David Friedberg on the All In Pod had a very interesting theory that I wanted to share with you guys on, again, these are what I just described as kind of a socialist principle, because again, you have the government playing a larger role in taking more money out of the pockets of its citizens. And Friedberg had this theory about why these socialist principles are becoming a little bit more mainstream. If you look at the total U.S. GDP, it's around $25 trillion. That's combining everything. And then you have federal, state, and local government spending combined to be $11.2 trillion. So your GDP, gross domestic product, is $25 trillion. Your spending of all government, federal, state, and local, is $11.2 trillion, which is about half of GDP. And so when half the population is employed by or reliant on government spending for revenue, such as you have a business and your main customer is the government, that's what drives these policies forward. Because essentially, you're not living anymore in an entrepreneurial capitalist market, okay? American capitalism needs a robust middle class, and globalization kind of starts to hollow that out. Millions of factory jobs have gone overseas, and that leads to a weakened middle class that doesn't really have the same vested interest in a free market. And so this unrealized gains tax is estimated to raise about $400 billion a year, which is only 20% of the current deficit. So again, in terms of how, maybe this will help with the deficit, not really. So even with all these taxes, we don't even come close to closing in on our own deficit here in this country. And no matter what you do, people will find ways to avoid this tax. Governments and funds might even pay the exit tax for valuable entrepreneurs to move abroad and take those jobs and capital with them. Capital, as we know, is very, very mobile, and this trend will only increase. Great example, France tried wealth taxes before. Guess what happened? Many of their citizens left. Every time there's a wealth tax that's tried, the wealth flees. And again, this is just being discussed right now. It's not even put into place. And you have politicians such as Elizabeth Warren, who already wants to lower the threshold to 50 million. All right. So thinking that you're not going to be affected by this at some point is a little bit naive. Okay. Now, I want to cover one more bit here, which is around purchasing of stock. And so for that, I've misplaced my notes on this. You guys are going to have to give me one moment while I pull this up. And again, like, I think the biggest thing to consider is that what's the impact of this? Okay. And that the impact is that it's going to weaken what makes America great, what gives us a supreme position in the world, which is technology. Andreesen Horowitz covered this. I'm covering this on the MedTech side. Okay. And so if we look at, finally, I found my notes on this. If we look at Zoom, I'm going to use Zoom as a stock example. Okay. So just to kind of, I know I have the smartest audience in the medtech industry, but I want to make sure that I paint a very clear picture for you. Okay. On unrealized gains. If you bought 100 shares of Zoom stock in January 2020 for $75 a share. Okay. So in January 2020, you bought 100 shares of Zoom stock at $75. Okay. Which means, so you spent $7,500. Okay. The year ends and Zoom is now at $350 a share. You all remember that, right? $350 a share. Amazing. But you didn't sell. Okay. You kept the stock, which gives you an unrealized gain of $27,500. But you didn't sell. Under the Harris administration's tax plan of unrealized gain, that year you would owe $6,875 in taxes. 25% of 27,000. Okay. But you didn't sell. So you don't have the cash. So what do? You pay the taxes out with your savings. You go borrow money from friends and family. I mean, who knows, right? But then you continue to hold the stock as you believe in it until August 2024. And finally, you sell the shares for $60 per share. So remember, you bought the shares for $75 each. Okay. You spent $7,500 to buy $75 shares. Okay. You finally sell it at $60 a share. Okay. And now what happened? You lost $1,500 because remember, you spent $7,500 to buy 100 shares at $75 each. 4 years later, you sold them all at $60 a share. Okay. You lost $1,500 plus you paid taxes on $27,000 already of gains you never actually received because they've just evaporated. So technically, if you add that up, right, $1,500 plus $6,875 that you paid back in 2020, you essentially spent you lost $8,375. There's no money that you got. You lost money. Okay? You lost money. You lost your investment and then some. So this tax proposal is, yes, it's only target 100 millionaires and billionaires, but that's just the start, my friends. In my opinion, it opens the gate to lower the threshold whenever the government chooses, and they will. Okay? Before you know it, every person who's going to own a stock is going to start paying the tax. And even let's give the benefit of the doubt, because this is all in theory. Let's just say that this gets put into place and guaranteed there's some ironclad policy that says we will never lower the threshold below $100 million. The average American is never going to deal with this. Well, guess what? That will hurt the medtech ecosystem. It'll hurt the tech ecosystem. It'll damage American supremacy in the world as a technology leader, because at that level, there's no incentive for anybody to start a company in the United States, let alone invest in one. And the dollars, the capital is very mobile. It'll move overseas. So to me, that was the one issue. As you can tell, I'm quite biased on it. That is the one most important issue for me. So that being said, since you listened all the way to the end, I want to thank you so much for being open-minded, for giving me the opportunity to share my notes, share what I've learned. And hopefully this will give you better guidance as to who you should vote. I recommend that you do the research. Don't just listen to me. I'm just a guy with a podcast on, in the medtech industry. But I appreciate the fact that you gave me the opportunity in America to have this kind of discourse with you. Many of you have messaged me online. We've talked over the phone. And if for some reason, if you listen to this podcast and you vote for Trump, I support you. If you listen to this podcast and you vote for Harris, I support you as well, because as an American, I want to live in a country where I can support my fellow American, my fellow citizens in their decisions, whether I agree with them or not, because that's what makes this country great, is our ability to share ideas openly, to debate them, and hopefully have an idea meritocracy where the best ideas, the best policy, etc. win. So with that being said, thank you so much for making it to 200 with me. It's very emotional for me because it's a great, this podcast has been sort of a, work out of pure love for the industry. I've met so many great people along the way. I'm continuing to meet some great people, and I'm just very grateful for the fact that the sponsors that we have, the listeners who give us 5 stars on Apple and Spotify and everything. And this is just a start. We have some exciting episodes coming up. We have a whole series on the history of U.S. surgical. I'm powering through that. We've done 4 interviews. That's going to be such an exciting series. We're going to hopefully release that towards the end of the year. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with somebody. Have a political discussion. Do the research, and you make up your own mind. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Give us 5 stars, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.